Welcome. The video today is on parent functions, and the goal is to recognize parent functions, their equations, their graphs, and characteristics. Okay, so let's just talk about real quick something you're going to see in the parent functions. You've seen this before, but we're going to use function notation. This is actually the same as y. And we're also going to use equations. So each graph is going to have, in this case we're going to start with x. Each graph is going to have its own equation that goes with that graph. Okay, so let's go to the first one. The linear function has its equation. This is how you would put it in the calculator. And now let's talk about domain and range. Because the graph looks like it's going in this direction or in this direction, it's actually going to follow along the x-axis forever. And the graph is going to use the y-axis and follow along it forever, using all of those points in the coordinate plane. Since it's doing that, we have to say that the domain is all real numbers and the range is all real numbers. Also notice that the y-intercept is 0, 0. Well, it crosses 0 at y equals 0, so that's the y-intercept, and it crosses at x equals 0, that's x-intercept. That'll be important for some of the other functions that you're going to see. Okay, let's go on to the next one, which is absolute value. Okay, the equation is using the absolute value symbol right here, but in order to put it into the calculator, we have to use the math button. The domain, since it's following along the x-axis to infinity, is going to be all real numbers. Because it starts at 0 right here and goes to infinity this way, the range is going to be 0 to infinity. Again, the y-intercept here is 0. Okay, let's go on to the quadratic. The quadratic is a parabola, which you've probably seen before in Algebra 1. Its equation is x squared, and here's how we're going to put it in the calculator. Its line is going to follow along the x-axis using all these points in the coordinate plane, going this way and this way to infinity. Okay, so the domain is all real numbers. The range, again, crosses the y-axis, or is the y-intercept at 0, and it starts at 0 and goes that way forever, so therefore the range is 0 to infinity. Okay, let's go on to the next one. The next one is the square root function. Notice how it starts at 0, 0. Okay, it's going to go this way and this way. Okay, so its equation is the square root of x. We're going to use the square root symbol in the calculator. Since it starts at 0 on the domain and goes in the x direction or along the x-axis, 0 to infinity, and the range is going to be 0 to infinity. Let's move on to the cubic. The cubic function is a lot like the linear function in that the domain and range are the same. It is an x cubed, and this is how we have to put it in the calculator. And the domain, since the graph will follow along the x-axis, okay, this graph will keep going forever and ever and ever. So it is actually following along the x-axis using all of those numbers. Okay, it's going to do that in both directions. It's also going to follow the y-axis using all those numbers this way and this way. So therefore, all real numbers are real numbers. Okay, just a couple more to go. The exponential is special because remember we've talked about the y-intercept going through 0. So the x is in the exponent. The equation has the x in the exponent for an exponential function. Okay, and here's how we're going to put in the calculator. Now, it is going to go along the x-axis that way and that way to infinity. So that will be all real numbers. However, the range will go this way to infinity, but it will never touch 0. Right here, as it follows along the x-axis, on the range, it will never go below 0. It'll never touch 0. The reason is because when you put a number in for x, there's no way that that can ever make 0. Okay? So in other words, the range is 0 to infinity, but it's not equal to 0. Okay? Let's go on to the next one. Logarithmic is a lot like the exponential. In fact, it is an inverse of the exponential function. The log equation is here, and you'll enter it the same way in the calculator. Now, the logarithmic function is not part of your quiz this week. However, you will see logarithms later on in the course. The domain is a lot like the exponential, where the range was 0 to infinity. The domain is also 0 to infinity. So right here, it'll come very close, but it will never reach 0. Okay? And so since this is going this way, we're going to say 0 to infinity, but not equal to 0. Okay? The range, which is actually going all the way up, will be all real numbers. All right, let's do the last function. Okay. The last function is the rational or reciprocal. Okay. It's 1 over x, and yes, you'll put that just like you were thinking you would put it in the calculator, 1 divided by x. And it is not going to equal 0, okay? Because there's no way that we can do 1 divided by 0. That's an error, okay? So at this point, x cannot equal 0, okay? So since that's the case, then what we're going to do is we're going to look at the domain and range. The domain is not equal to 0, so therefore it's 0 to infinity going this way and 0 to infinity going that way. For the range, it is going to be 0 to infinity going that way and 0 to infinity going that way. And that is your reciprocal function. The most important part of all these functions is to recognize what they look like. You need to know their equations, their graphs, and then their characteristics, like their domain and range. All right.